So February is Rotary's Peace and Conflict Resolution Month. Dorothy Thompson, a prominent and influential American journalist, wrote that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of creative alternatives for responding to conflict. That is, alternatives to passive or aggressive responses, alternatives to violence. The Don Dunstan Foundation is a non-profit think tank dedicated to advancing social justice and creating a more equitable and sustainable future for South Australia and beyond. Inspired by the visionary leadership of former Premier Don Dunstan, a champion of social reform and human rights, their foundation works to address critical social issues and build a stronger and more inclusive community. Before leading the Don Dunstan Foundation, David Washington spent over 30 years in journalism, worked as editorial director for several Adelaide media outlets, covered federal politics, wrote on a wide range of topics, from urban development to food, and also served in senior communication roles for government and major national events like the Sydney Olympics. David's leadership marks a focus on bringing public engagement and contemporary relevance, bringing together communications expertise with the Foundation's research and policy work, using persuasive narrative and framing to influence how readers think about public policy issues. Would you please join me in warmly welcoming David Washington.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to you all for having me here today to talk. I love that the focus is on peace at the moment. The world obviously needs a lot more of that, but it seems to be one of those old-fashioned aspirations that we don't talk about enough, like egalitarianism, which used to be something we talked about as a fundamental part of Australian society, which we don't talk about so much anymore, but I think those values are important and enduring. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're on the land of the Kaurna people and pay my respects to them and their elders. Don Dunstan died in 1999 before acknowledgements and welcomes to country had become widespread at events of this sort, but I'm sure he would have approved. He was one of the first politicians to recognise that the wider community in Australia had something to learn from Aboriginal people and cultures. He saw that not enough people understood or valued, as he put it, the more subtle relationship that Aboriginal people had with this land. And he was in this area, as in many fields, a man ahead of his time. And I imagine many of you in this room will understand a bit about who Don was and his career. I'm really pleased we've got some visitors from the UK, so I'll give you the summary. So my view that Don is arguably Australia's greatest social reformer. He grew up in Fiji and also South Australia. In his university years, he went to St Mark's, just across the road. He entered the Parliament in the 1950s as the youngest member of the lower house, the House of Assembly here, at the age of 26. And he was somewhat of an unusual figure in a Labor Party that was dominated by union blokes. Don's union was the actors union. And Don, in his university years, he studied law, excuse me, but he also studied at the Elder Conservatorium, studied piano for a time, and continued to love the performing arts. He was a young Attorney General in the Welsh Labor government in the 1960s, where he, in 1965, he gained approval from the Cabinet because of his persuasive and dogged advocacy to make some changes to the Criminal Law Consolidation Act, among them ending the death penalty, but also legalising decriminalising male homosexuality. That didn't go ahead at that time for various reasons, because the caucus, the Labor MPs, lost their nerve. But it took 10 years until he was Premier for that to occur. So he had two stints as Premier, one in the 1960s briefly, and then for most of the 1970s. And so that's come to be known in South Australia as the Dunstan decade. It's hard to summarise exactly what happened during that decade, but there was a lot. He got rid of some undemocratic practices, including a gerrymander, which meant that people in the country their votes worth about triple what people in the city were. The upper house of Parliament was not a universal franchise, so you had to be a property owner to sit in that house. He changed that. He introduced Australia's first anti-discrimination legislation, Australia's first Aboriginal land rights legislation. He introduced the first Environment Department. He introduced the Container Deposit Scheme, which is a South Australian innovation to decrease litter and problems like that. He appointed the first Aboriginal governor in Australia's history, and the lists go on and on. In his younger life, he was a co-founder of Meals on Wheels in South Australia. He was a key figure in ending the White Australia policy. So for much of Australia's modern history, we had a discriminatory immigration policy, which was explicitly designed to lock out people from non-English backgrounds. So he did a lot. And in September this year, the foundation, which was established just before Don died, actually, and he wrote the principles that still govern us. We will be celebrating Don's centenary in September. He was born in Suva, Fiji, on 21 September 1926, where his parents were living, and his father was running the local branch of the Adelaide Steamship Company. And as a child, he came back to South Australia, lived in Murray Bridge for a while because of health reasons, but he went back again. He observed at close quarters racial segregation and racial discrimination in Fiji. He also observed that in Murray Bridge with a child of Italian parents and an Aboriginal child. And from those years, he had a powerful distaste for discrimination of all kinds. While we're going to celebrate Don's achievements, obviously, in September and through this year, we see this also as this moment as a pretty crucial moment for South Australia and Australia. So Don saw South Australia as a place where we could make change. We could influence the country and the world. And our history here, our modern history, is one of doing that. We obviously led the way for votes for women and many other areas. So the 1970s, Don seized many moments for change in the midst of some social turmoil, really. And I think similarly, we are in a time of pretty tectonic political and social shifts that, despite some of the gloom and fear about our future, they do offer an opportunity for positive and profound, long-lasting change. And I think that's the lesson of Don's leadership. While at the time, he wasn't popular across the political spectrum. In retrospect, a lot of the changes he made, the things he built, are welcomed by all people. And a lot of what he achieved was done with support across the political divide. So the festival centre over there, the Arts Hub South Australia, was started by a Liberal movement premier, Still Hall. Don supported that, completed it, expanded it. A significant piece of legislation to establish the APY lands for Aboriginal people was that legislation was started in the Dunstan years and was completed by the Tonkin Liberal government. The decriminalisation of male homosexuality, the first move towards that was presented by after Don's failed attempt in the 1960s, was presented by a Liberal member of the Upper House, Murray Hill, whose son went on to be a respected member of the Howard government cabinet. Today, I think that just as there in South Australia became a place where young people wanted to come to experience this world of transformation and greater freedom, I think we have an opportunity now for what is becoming the dominant demographic group in the Australian electorate, so-called millennials and Gen Zs, people in their 20s and coming into their 30s. I think we have an opportunity to engage them in the possibilities of democracy, not just the failings and the problems. This group already made their presence felt at the 2025 federal election. And the Australian Election Study, which is done by university researchers for the past 40 years, showed that younger voters demonstrated an overwhelming preference for Labor and the Greens in 2025. This is at a level not seen in nearly 40-year history. And this is a problem for the Liberal Party, obviously, which we're seeing them work through at the moment. But I just mentioned their political bit to show, to demonstrate their influence. And the interesting thing to me is that I think the voices and concerns of these generations are strangely absent from our political discourse and even our policy making in lots of areas, which is strange and politically counterintuitive. And it's particularly unfortunate because these generations are at the pointy end of Australia's biggest policy challenges. Among them, climate change and the disastrous state of housing affordability, which by any measure is a disaster. There's increasing economic distress, I think, with growing gaps between the rich and poor, and this wealth gap is becoming generational. Too many politicians, community and business leaders talk about climate action as though it's some kind of abstract concept or some kind of nice to have rather than essential to our future. But for these younger generations, they have grown up through the millennial drought, historic increases in the intensity and frequency of heat waves, unprecedented bushfire disasters, and in South Australia, an ecological crisis in our marine environment. So it's understandable, I think, that these younger voters are deeply concerned about their future. The connection between secure and adequate housing and climate change is obvious to them, but perhaps not to everyone in the electorate. Many people have established wealth now built by an out-of-control housing market, and for them, solar panels, batteries, and efficient cooling systems literally insulate them from climate realities. Don's policy concerns and even his approach to politics remain relevant, including for these younger people, many of whom were born after his death in 1999. He viewed housing as a bottom-line responsibility for government. And he proceeded to make South Australia, for a time, all too brief, the leading jurisdiction for building public housing. He expressed explicitly that we needed proper secure housing because of our climate. And his concerns would be even greater today as climate change accelerates. He, perhaps more than any other political leader in our history, understood that human beings are more than economic units. He knew that life had many more dimensions than work, and I think we also see with these younger generations that they see that as well. They don't see work as an end in itself. They see it as a facilitator for a broader life. Don, like many younger people I know today, loves diversity, difference, even eccentricity. He wanted South Australia to be a place where, in the parlance of the day, people could do their own thing, free of judgment and discrimination. And for our visitors, Don was very famous for, while as Premier, turning up to Parliament wearing pink shorts, very short shorts. He was a very stylish man, and at times a provocative man. He also had, while he wanted people to be able to express themselves in their own unique way, he also demonstrated a kind of political leadership that we hadn't seen before. He considered arts and culture, urban design, food and hospitality as part of a rich community life. He championed alfresco dining in Adelaide, which was unheard of. He ended what was called the 6 o'clock swill, whereby pubs had to close at 6 o'clock, so the blokes would line up, because they were all blokes, would line up, 6 pints and down them before they went home. He had a broader view of the world. I didn't even realise this until I joined the foundation. In the 1970s, we used to have something called Malaysia Week, where he tried to celebrate Malaysian culture. We have some close connections geographically through the universities, but also that the man who designed Adelaide, Colonel William Light, his father was involved in Georgetown, Penang, in its design. So there are close connections there. He loved Italy as well, and that's where the ideas of alfresco dining came from. All of these areas required legislative support. He wasn't just airy-fairy about them, including, interestingly, heritage protection, which we had very little of before Don was Premier, and it's something that plays on my mind when I see Edmund Wright House, which is one of the most beautiful buildings in Adelaide, designed by the architect of Parliament House in the Town Hall, was sold by a previous government. It was in public hands since the early 70s to a private investor, and it lies there locked and closed away. It was a campaign to save that building from being razed for a nondescript office block that led to Don stepping in, buying it, and introducing heritage protection legislation. I think all of these things resonate with this new dominant bloc of voters who yet, as I said, remain amorphous in the political discussion. They define themselves in a way that goes well beyond work, as important as that is, but they're facing an uphill economic climb to have the same sorts of lives as their parents. So in the midst of this sometimes grim outlook, fostering hope is really crucial. I think that's something that the Rotary Club intrinsically gets and has always got. Without hope, people can disengage from democratic processes, and unscrupulous leaders can seek to leverage pain for personal political profit. And across the globe, including in Australia, democracy is being frayed by such opportunist populists, in my view, who promise to create a new economic and social order. In reality, just continuation of the old order while having no serious plans to do anything about it, apart from fostering fear, usually about immigrants. Don was an early champion of multiculturalism. He built some of his political support on supporting immigrants from the UK and Italy. When he was Premier, he had a Greek-speaking woman in his office just to help out the Greek community with issues. He got it as something which was crucial to our future, but also as a political reality as well. I think there's plenty of evidence that young Australians reject this new form of toxic politics, but their economic and social challenges are very, very real. So, the foundation. We were set up to continue Don's legacy. As you can see, Don's legacy is very large and diverse. So it hasn't always been easy to hone in. We've done amazing projects in the past to do with homelessness, and I was brought in about 18 months ago to bring some life to new areas of focus, which include climate justice, Aboriginal empowerment, housing and homelessness, civic society, essentially the quality of democracy. And we are hoping, somewhat counterintuitively, to use Don's centenary to elevate the voices of young advocates, policymakers, and maybe, yes, even influencers to contribute fresh ideas about policy and politics. And what Don's legacy shows them, many of them who don't know who he was, when we explain what he did and how this is part of a venerable history of South Australia in being a place for social advancement, social reform. They are inspired. So at a conference in September to mark Don's 100th birthday, in new research projects we're going to be rolling out this year, in our entire approach to advocacy, we'll be focusing on these generations to talk about these issues. Don would connect with these generations, their values, the breadth of their perspective, their passion for change, the challenges they face. He'd be worried about their future, of course. And we hope that the more younger Australians learn about Don, the more they will connect with the possibilities he demonstrated and the possibilities that he showed we have as a community. Because as I often say, Don's achievements were our achievements as a community. We can, as we did before him and after him, we can create national and global change starting here in South Australia. And we might even inspire some new Don Dunstans to emerge, passionate, bright, and resolute. Thank you.
We do have time for some questions.
Yes.
Thank you, David. As a teenager of the 70s, one of my enduring memories of Don Dunstan was him standing on the end of, I think it was the Glenelg jetty, when we were supposedly going to be inundated by a tsunami. But my question for you actually was, how is the foundation funded? Is it a funded body? Do you raise your own funds?
It's a bit of both. So we have endowments from, our owners are the Flinders University and the University of Adelaide, so now Adelaide University, so all of the public universities in South Australia are our members, our only members, and we have endowments from them. We have a small government grant, the rest of the money we raise ourselves. I'm realising I didn't give you a good outline of what our activities are and will be this year, but we are looking to fund training for young advocates and to help them to elevate their voices and to understand how politics works, which I think is really important, and to understand how public advocacy works. It's become harder and harder for politicians and decision makers to make long-term evidence-based decisions. In the modern climate, that is not always an easy proposition. It's very easy for scare campaigns and risk aversion to dominate. So we're looking at trying to encourage younger generations to understand how the system works and to make their voices heard as well. We're sponsoring an edition of Splinter Journal, which is a literary journal which has just started a year or so ago, run by the universities. They'll be producing a whole edition with fiction and non-fiction about these issues and about Don's legacy. We've got a podcast in the works as well, along similar lines, talking about Don, but also talking about the future. We run the Lower O'Donoghue Oration every year, which I'm not sure if any of you have been to it, but it's during Reconciliation Week. And we bring an excellent national speaker here to talk about issues concerning Aboriginal people. Lower O'Donoghue and Don were very close. We have a research project which we're about to launch about housing affordability in South Australia, drilling down quite deeply on local communities and how they're affected, because it obviously is dependent on where you live, although housing affordability housing is not affordable. Rents are not affordable in virtually any part of South Australia right now, which is a pretty terrible situation. We're involved with several projects about improving democracy, and our focus on younger people is key to that. We want them to see the possibilities of democracy, not just the problems.
Heidi, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, David. I've got a 29-year-old daughter, so that age group is finished school, finished uni, now in the workforce, got a mortgage, that group that you were talking about, that kind of is a bit isolated from perhaps knowing about information about the Don Dunstan Foundation and things like that, because they've got their careers, their the families and all of that. I'm just wondering how you intend to engage them. You talked about younger people, you talked about the universities, and I know education departments, so secondary schools are getting some a bit of a focus on democracy for them. What about that age group, late 20s, early 30s?
Yeah, it's a good question, and what we have to do is engage with the forms of communication that they engage with, and everyone's different, of course, but we can get some clues from things like. And this is really interesting. If people are interested in the media, this is a really interesting report to look at. The University of Canberra does a digital media report every year where they show how different age groups and cohorts, where they get their news and information from. And younger people are getting their news and information increasingly from social media accounts and from social media connected, influenced podcasters, and we're wanting to engage with those people who communicate with those people, if that makes sense. So my offsider who runs our communications and engagement is a 20-something, and we are looking at building. A lot of the stuff we're going to do this year is designed to be able to be communicated via social media and the podcast sphere as well. I think that as a former journalist, I think the world of digital media has got some problems, but also it's got some advantages as well. I hope that
makes sense. So as my age group, we probably won't even know what's going on in that space. We just hope that our young adults are connected with.
I also want to say that we want to keep communicating with people who aren't in those groups as well, but they're an easier ask in some ways.
Yeah, please.
Well, so like Jill, certainly remember Don as the Premier, and that very interesting time politically in South Australia with, I suppose, the end of Tom Playford and Walsh and then, Stu Hall and so on. Quite a vibrant time really for democracy in South Australia. It just strikes me that the Labor Party that we've got today is a little different to the Labor Party that Don led. Do you have any sort of interest?
Well, I should say too that we're a non-partisan foundation. Obviously, we have a lot of people from the Labor Party who are interested in our work because Tom was a Labor politician. But yes, it is different. I think in lots of. I mean, the world is different. And I think that when Don was different in the Labor Party, you're showing me a picture of you were at the Treasury.
This is the Walsh show. So in the Adina Hotel, if I may.
Yeah.
In the Adina Hotel, if you were there on a Treasury tour, just see was a reception, or just behind the reception area, where one of the rooms upstairs, where the Premier and Cabinet would meet. There's a photograph of the Walsh government in 1966, and there's all these old men in very dark suits sitting around a cabinet table, and one young Don Dunstan in white, standing out like a proverbial.
I think it was a light grey suit or something, who knows, but...
Safari suit, yes.
I've thought about that a lot. I think I've covered politics as a journalist since I was very young. I went to Canberra in 1988 for the Advertiser when Hawke was. I was extremely young, practically a child, when Hawke was Prime Minister, and I've observed politics up close for a long time. And I think we kind of underestimate leadership. Like leadership is the secret sauce to getting things done. I mean, Don created support in all kinds of unexpected areas, and he was quite, even though he's seen as a sort of a progressive, almost otherworldly kind of figure, he was a very pragmatic politician. If something wasn't going to work, he pulled back from it and waited for another opportunity. Like he didn't push things if he knew he was going to lose. But yeah, no, things have changed, and the challenges now are a lot more complex. And as I said before, I think it's a lot harder for politicians to make profound change. There are so many forces and voices, and we're obviously a globally connected world now that we weren't back then. Young people and older people, we're all being influenced by things that are not even happening in our community, like the whole, manosphere thing, masculinity influences, all that kind of stuff. These aren't even local people. They're just people can identify with a community that's not even here.
So what you're saying is the sort of the cover of, it's not really the cover of darkness, but the cover of being small before all the communications back in the 70s, that situation's gone, and then we have to kind of be like everybody else kind of.
I hope not. I mean, I hope we can remain distinctive, and I think people still value that. I'm just saying, I think politics is hard these days. If it seems debased in some regards, I think it is harder these days to achieve change, positive change. It's easy to make things worse, I think.
Stephen, you had a question, please?
Just wondering if your new journal is going to bring back that much loved column, The Touch of the Fumbles.
This is, if you know, you know. So I edited a publication called In Daily here for 12 years, and we had a football column, much loved or hated, depending on your perspective, called A Touch of the Fumbles. Which, no, I'm afraid, I think Tom, who wrote that, is now ensconced in the office of Minister Koutsantonis, sadly.
Very sad.
But I think he would love to have kept writing it. we thought in 2017 we were going to finish it, but with a Crows premiership, but obviously that didn't turn out, did it? That didn't work. Yeah.
Thanks very much. David, in closing, I want to also quote Dorothy Thompson again, and there's been a bit of a thread as a journalist, and a very noted journalist as well, particularly chosen around that and peace building. She says that peace has to be created in order to be maintained. It is the product of faith, strength, energy, will, sympathy, justice, imagination, and the triumph of principle. It will never be achieved by passivity and quietism. The Foundation's work embodies this, and the 8 pillars of positive peace to inspire creative and resilient society. David, thank you much for your presentation.